Well, it's good to be back here after some time away. It's lovely to see you. There's a bright light shining off that car right in my eyes, but that's okay. That way. Perfect. Actually, that is perfect. Yeah, that's right. It's really good to be up here today. Yesterday, in the calendar of churches that are more liturgical than this one, and the one that I pastored down in Adelaide, liturgical churches, particularly in the Orthodox tradition, they were celebrating a day called the Feast Day of St. Nicholas of Myra. St. Nicholas of Myra. You all know about him, don't you? Well, actually you do. I'll tell you about him a bit more in a while. It was also just incidentally, technically, the 34th anniversary of my ordination to ministry yesterday, so that was kind of nice to remember that. Enough about me. St. Nicholas lived from 270 AD to 343 AD. So there's a really significant event in the history of the church that happens during his lifetime that he attended. It was called the Council of Nicaea. I want to tell you a bit about that in a moment. He was the son of wealthy Christian parents living in northern Turkey, a place called Patara in northern Turkey. And he grew up, he had a profession, I don't know what he did, and he was one of those few people in the history of churches who went straight from ordinary or regular life to being a bishop. He wasn't ordained beforehand, he just was immediately made a bishop. He must have been quite an impressive guy, I think. And he attended the Council of Nicaea, and he opposed a man there called Arius. There's only one. There's a few records of the attendees of the bishops at the Council of Nicaea. It was a gathering of people to try and make sense of how does Jesus relate to God? What's the relationship between Jesus and God? There've been all kinds of ideas floating around, and Arius had one particular idea that actually gained a lot of popularity. He had a view that Jesus was God-ish, that he was related to God, but not really of the same essence as God. That was Arius's view. And Nicholas, amongst others, opposed him, and that's what that was. And at one point it got a bit feisty, apparently. And apparently the legend is, nobody's sure, nobody took minutes of the meeting, but the legend is that Nicholas slapped Arius in the face. Now, I don't think there's ever a good way to solve a problem. But anyway, he's become famous for doing that. So he attended there, and he was really keen to have a true view, a scriptural view of the relationship of God the Father with Jesus the Son. We heard in the reading today that God has spoken to the world now through a Son. And that was what Arius was trying to work out. He was using entirely human ways of trying to work out what does it mean to say that Jesus is the Son. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Just want to say too that Nicholas is remembered for being a person who did a great deal of good to people. There's lots of legends that have become attached to him over time, and some of them are just ridiculous. When he was born, immediately his grandparents were healed of all their illnesses. I don't think that's true. But there's one, which I'll tell you a bit later, one legend about him that it doesn't get repeated with any other person, so it seems to me that it's quite, and to many scholars it seems like if any of them are true, it's probably this one. So we'll come to that a bit later on. So the Council of Nicaea in the 1700-year anniversary this year of the Council of Nicaea. 325, 2025, here we go. So we've been celebrating all year, haven't we, the Council of Nicaea. And if you've ever said the Nicene Creed in church, that's where that's from. That was the document. That was what came out of that great council. It was trying to find agreement about the doctrine that speaks of the relationship of Jesus to God the Father. And the council affirmed that the testimony of the apostles and the witness of Holy Scripture presented the mystery of the Trinity, that the one God has existed in eternity as three persons in relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Jesus is the Son of the eternal Godhead who has become human, taken on human existence in the incarnation at Christmas. And so the Nicene Creed says this about Jesus, that he is the only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father. Now, as soon as you use the word begotten, you're generally thinking about a beginning in time, aren't you? Like, we begot children, and we have their birth dates. Not their begetting dates, but their birth dates. And so that was Arius' problem. Begotten, like when John says, begotten of the Father, in his great prologue to his gospel, that must mean the Son of God had a beginning in time. That was what Arius thought. But the council says, no, he's eternally begotten. So there isn't a beginning. There isn't a point in time. He's always been the begotten Son, which is kind of mysterious, and we don't really have a lot of time to go into that. It goes on and it says, so he's eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God of true God, of one being with the Father. Through him all things were made. And so in a way, that section of the Nicene Creed is capturing the essence of our verse today. And Arius differed. He said no to that. And the problem with his approach, which it must be said was entirely logical within a human framework, was he was anthropomorphizing God. That's a long word. In other words, he was starting with human existence and then trying to build that up to describe how God exists. But as soon as you do that, we are creatures, not the creator. We are less than God. We aren't God. So you can't really work up from us to God. You have to begin with God to understand God. That's really important to know. You can't know God through logic or comparisons. The only way to know God is when God reveals himself to you. And the way God has revealed himself to the world is actually coming among us in his Son. The Son is the very likeness of God. And so when Jesus comes into the world in human form, we actually have the truth of God being revealed to us. It's quite amazing, isn't it? He also had a problem with... Oh, it doesn't matter. I won't go there. Now, the Nicene Creed recognises that we cannot do that anthropomorphizing. We have to begin with God. Even though God reveals himself to us by becoming a human being, we can't then start with the reality of humanity to work back to God. We have to discover what God is saying about himself through the person Jesus. God is not limited to creaturely realities. So today, I want to speak about the connection between our Bible reading, Nicholas of Myra, and our faith as described by the Council of Nicaea. The reading from Hebrews 1 speaks about the truth about Jesus that has been made known the truth about God that has been made known uniquely in Jesus. So in the past, God has spoken through the prophets. He's been giving revelation to Israel and revealing himself to them. That's an incomplete revelation, but when Jesus comes, in these last days, we have the finalising of the truth of God being made known to us. there's nothing new for God to say. He said everything in Jesus. So some churches or some religious movements, like the Book of Mormon, they're claiming that something more had to come. Even within the Christian church, we have something at the moment called the New Apostolic Movement, which is saying that there's new revelations from God about how to be God's people. At least they're not saying there's something new about God, but everything we need to know about God, and therefore everything we need to know about how we live our lives in this world, we know through Jesus Christ. He finalises the revelation of the truth of God. And this is because he is God's Son, appointed by God to inherit the world, a world that was created by God through him. So get that. He's going to inherit the world, but it was a world that way back at the very beginning was created by God through the Son. So he's the Son who's going to inherit the world. He's the Son who created the world, and he's the Son who's come into the world. These are really enormous statements. Everything that is will find its destiny in Jesus. You will find your destiny in Jesus. He's going to claim everything at the end. It's his inheritance. And everything that is has its origins through Jesus. We simply cannot understand anything except we know and understand Jesus. We can't really find sense of our lives outside of Jesus. Without him, the world is an unsolvable puzzle. Now, last night I went to hear a man whose name, it sounds a little bit weird, it's Merlin Sheldrake. Anybody heard of Merlin Sheldrake? No, he doesn't have a staff. He's a mycologist. He's a world expert on funguses. Did you know that in the top 15 centimetres of all the land on the earth, there's so much fungus growing? You know how they form their little mycelia? They're kind of like long tubes, really thin hairs that they spread by. There's enough mycelia in the top 15 centimetres of all the land in the earth that if you laid it end to end, it would be multiple times longer or broader than the whole universe. If you put them end to end and you travelled at the speed of light, it would take you more than 1 billion years to travel the distance. I just find that extraordinary about how the world we live in. But anyway, there's Merlin Sheldrake, young guy who's probably had way too much praise at an age too young for him to be able to handle it well. And everybody was loving him last night. But anyway, he made the comment, as he travels around and talks with people about fungus, like he's not just really interested in talking about fungus. He actually wants to explore philosophical and what does this mean for our world and what does this mean for us as humanity kind of questions as he speaks. But he said so many people that he speaks to don't see a future for the world. So he wanted to explore how will fungus help us find out a new view of a future for the world. And I think it was a little bit silly, but anyway, but it was very interesting. But why would you look to fungus when the one who created the world and the one who's going to inherit the world has come into the world? I think really, if you followed him through, the world's meaning is just in being, just in existing. But what scriptures are telling us is that the world's meaning is that it comes from God and is going to the God through Jesus Christ, who's come into the world. Now, there's a lot of talk about the relationship between the doctrine of creation and science in the church, isn't there? You've probably been in some of those conversations, and fair enough. But in many ways, the discussion claims far too much time. The real question for us isn't what's the relationship between creation and science. The real question is what's the relationship between creation and God? That's the real question. What's the relationship actually between creation and Jesus Christ? That's the important question. The relationship of Jesus, who exists before there's a world as the eternal Son of God, and to whom the world is going as his inheritance, and this God who has then entered enfleshed as Jesus Christ. What's the relationship of creation and him? And the New Testament writers are really interested in that. In Romans 11, verse 36, Paul tells us that all things are from, through, and to our all-wise God. Everything is from him, through him, and to him. And in Colossians chapter 1, verse 15 following, he tells us that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He is the firstborn, that is the one who will inherit all creation, and that all things were created by him on earth and in heaven, he says. All things on earth and in heaven, that is the whole physical and spiritual universe, visible and invisible. And they were all powers that exist. Everything has come to be through Jesus, created by him and through him and for him. What can be said of God in Romans 11 is here said explicitly about Jesus in Colossians 1. So Romans 11 said that all things are from, through and to God, and Colossians says they're from, through and to Jesus, Christ. That tells us something really important about Jesus. He's not just another bloke. He's true man and true God, which is staggering. That's what the writer to the Hebrews is telling us in today's reading. He is the Son who will inherit all things which have been created through him, and he's holding all those things together. Science explores how this world came to be and works, but faith explores the who and why of this world. You might have heard this example. You can give a scientific description of a cake. You can mention all the chemicals that are in it, or the molecules that have been formed to make it up. But there's a lot more to say about a cake, isn't there? Like a cake can be a birthday cake. So it's actually celebrating another person's life. The meaning of a cake isn't just its chemical makeup. A cake can be a gift of love. There's so much more to a cake. And this world is more than just what we can analyse about it. There's a why and a who to this world. The whole world has its existence in and for Jesus Christ. Paul preached in Athens, and he quoted some unexpected wisdom, really, from one of the poets of the day. He says this, quoting even as one of your poets says, in him, so he's talking there about this sort of unknown God to the Greeks and the Romans. In him we live and move and have our being. So there's really no way of properly speaking about ourselves. If we live and move and have our being in God, we cannot properly speak about ourselves and our destiny except we understand the truth about Jesus. So that says something really important for all of us today and for this community in which we live, which you live, and the community in which I live. You can't make sense of anything, really, until you've discovered the truth about Jesus. And if you're resisting the truth about Jesus, you're resisting actually the truth about yourself, even if you're trying to find yourself as you're resisting him. To say Jesus inherits all things actually means to say finally that all things, all powers, visible and invisible, will answer to him. That's picking up this idea of inheritance. He will determine the destiny of all. In Psalm 2 verse 8, there's a prophetic oracle addressed to one who is both the Lord's anointed, the Messiah, and acclaimed as God's son, when God says, "Ask of me, and I will give the nations for your inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for your heritage." So basically the same idea. So God is giving everything to his son as his inheritance. And that really means that everything actually answers to him. That not only is he the meaning, we owe it to him that we understand that he's our meaning, our reason for being. That starts to get, it's nice to think that, well, Jesus will provide me with meaning, but you owe it to him that he be your meaning. It's not that just he provides you with meaning, like that's a nice thing for you. No, it's actually a demand. When all things are for him, you are required to be for him. The psalm goes on and it speaks of how Christ will rule these nations, breaking in pieces those who ultimately oppose and resist him. Bam! That's not quite so cuddly anymore, is it? The psalm calls on all, especially the powerful, to give thought to how they relate to Jesus, and all includes us. And Jesus' advice, the psalm's advice is kiss him quickly. Kiss him quickly. Make peace with him. Receive his forgiveness and begin anew in the truth, not in the lie that the world could have final meaning without him. In a way, Eric, that's kind of what I was saying. Like, we don't have a right to life being the way we want it. We have to have life as Jesus gives life to us. And we need to reconcile ourselves through the reconciliation he provides to us. Here's wonderful news. It's unexpectedly glorious news, because it sounds like we can read these things as human beings and think that makes God sound incredibly selfish. He's just about himself. He's got this close. He's created everything for his son. Like it's in the family, and blow anybody else. The unexpectedly glorious thing about Jesus, the Son of God, through whom and for whom all things exist, is that he has come into the world at the behest of the Father in order to share in our own creatureliness and to give us a share in his inheritance. So he's inheriting all things, but he's come among us, making purification for sins. You're going to see that as you keep going through Hebrews. And he sits at the Father's right hand, but that's in order that we may share in his inheritance. That's an amazing thing, isn't it? That's the great truth we remember at Advent. The babe whose birth at Bethlehem we look to celebrate at Christmas was God's Son come among us to give us a share in his future. Now, we can have a very hard view of God, but this God, for whom and through whom and to him all things are, is actually created so that we may have it with him. That's actually incredibly generous, isn't it? Why did God create the world? Well, for his Son, but in his Son, for us. Jesus made this point when he taught the crowd. He said, "Blessed are the meek," or the humble, "for they shall inherit the earth." An amazing thing. We share in the Son's inheritance. Paul taught it in Romans 8, 16 and 17, that we, having been adopted by the Father, share as brothers and sisters with Jesus in the inheritance. And the Spirit of God is given to us as kind of the down payment of that inheritance. The glorious Son of God does not stand apart from us, nor demand like some earthly ruler that we give everything to him, even though all things are for him and to him. No, he gives all to us. In fact, he comes and he takes our loss of everything. He takes our death and our sin into himself and bears it away, and then gives us everything that's his to share with him in it. What overflowing grace and kindness. In Jesus, we find that God has reconciled us to himself. His greatness is in his generosity. It's beautiful, isn't it? Now, I want to say, kind of in closing, that when we discover this, when we find out that this God, for whom and to him and through him are all things, is actually the great giver, and we share in the inheritance, then that means that we too, through the spirit of the gift of the Spirit, we will ourselves be givers. We'll become generous people through the gift of God. Now, Nicholas of Myra, this is the one legend that is probably true. He's actually known these days, patron saint of many things, but including pawnbrokers. So pawnbrokers are people who, when you're in financial trouble, you can come and sell them something and they'll give you some money for it and then charge you an exorbitant rate of interest to buy it back from them later. I have a friend who sold his guitar a number of times to pawnbrokers. He could have bought millions of guitars with the money, but anyway, that's another matter. So how did that come to be? That he's a... Do you know what the sign of the pawnbroker is? You know how you've got the barber's pole? The pawnbroker always has 3 gold balls hanging out, or the old day pawnbroker, you have 3 golden balls hanging outside the pawnbroker's shop. And the legend about Nicholas is that because he inherited great wealth from his parents. They were wealthy parents. And but he used his wealth to do good. And there were 3 young women, unmarried women, virgins, in his city, but very poor. And they were likely, in order to be able to, for the family to survive, would likely have been sold into prostitution if they couldn't get married. And because they were poor, they couldn't get married. And so one night, Nicholas snuck to the house and dropped through the window 3 bags of gold. And that enabled them to... so he did it very secretly. That enabled them then to have a dowry so that made them marriable. It's a lovely story, isn't it? I think that's probably true. Now, Nicholas of Myra, he's a famous saint. We're actually celebrating him around this time of year too. So he, all these legends grew around him, and he became a very popular saint. And over time, his name, Saint Nicholas, in Italian became Santa Nicolaus, so it became Santa Claus. So that's who Saint Nicholas is. Now, Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas, is nothing like the commercialised Santa Claus of our day. But he is, I guess, still a secret giver of gifts, isn't he, you know, supposedly. But Nicholas, he was arguing at Nicaea for this truth about Jesus. The one from whom, through whom, and to whom are all things. And we may have been blessed very richly by God. So God has given us in Jesus everything. But this is the God who pours his Spirit into us so that everything about our lives, everything about who we are and what we do and what we have is really not for us. It is for the glory of God and for the good of others. The Spirit of God is the Spirit of giving, the Spirit of the giving God. It's the Spirit the gift of giving. And that's what we find in Jesus, and that's what we're called to as his people. I'll stop there.